I'm joined today by Professor Bill McGuire, Special Scientific Advisor to the Word Forest Organisation, Professor Emeritus at UCL, a volcanologist, a blogger, an author. Bill, good day to you. Have I missed anything out?
I think all the important things are in there.
Good. Your main career was in volcanology. My first question is, how did you get into that? What was it that took you into that career?
Well, it wasn't really planned initially. I did a degree in geology at university, which is always a subject I've been interested in. I wanted to go into planetary science after that. I wanted to sort of look at the geology of Mars and the Moon and this sort of thing. But an opportunity came up to do a PhD on Mount Aetna in Sicily, and the thought of the wine and the sun and everything else was just too much. So I took that up, and things went on from there. So I carried on working on Aetna. And then from there on to volcanoes all over the world. Some narrow escapes, but fantastic fun and just staggering to watch volcanoes erupt.
So Aetna was actually live at the point where you were first introduced to her. Am I right? Volcanoes, she?
Yeah.
Are they female?
Aetna is actually. But Aetna is one of those volcanoes that's always doing something. It's always erupting to some degree, and it's got active vents at the summit, so you can always hear explosions, you can always see something happening. I wasn't actually working on the summit. I was working on this huge chunk of volcano that had fallen off the east flank, but you're never very far from the action. And it's just I described my PhD as a walking holiday with excellent red wine and plenty of sun, where I had to look at the odd rock, which pretty much describes it.
Yeah, that sounds like the kind of PhD you want to do. Okay, so have you been to many volcanoes? Are they too numerous to mention now?
They're not too numerous to mention. I tend to, like most colleagues, focus on certain volcanoes. So I've worked mainly on Aetna for decades. I've worked in the Canary Islands, particularly La Palma, which erupted recently. We did the research on the unstable west flank there, which has caused a lot of concern. And I've been to volcanoes in the Caribbean and Iceland and the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and the Indian Ocean, etc., etc. So quite a few, but I can keep count. It's not that many.
Sure. For anybody that doesn't know, could you just explain what the unstable west flank in the Canaries means? What might happen?
Yeah, well, it's amazing.
When?
It's amazing how many people have heard of this. We made a Horizon program, BBC Horizon, in 2000. And it was all about the western side of this volcano, the Cumbre Vieja, which detached in 1949 during an eruption and is sort of hanging there. And at some point in the future, it will collapse into the North Atlantic and has a potential to generate a colossal tsunami, an Atlantic-wide tsunami. We have no idea when, but obviously when the recent eruption started, there was a great deal of concern in case it happened to be this eruption. It could be dozens of eruptions down the line. But it's normal activity for a volcano. They get bigger and bigger and bigger. They get unstable, and then big bits fall off the side. So it's nothing new. It's just that we haven't experienced them in modern history.
But a tsunami that goes all the way across the Atlantic is a pretty scary thing for anybody that's on the opposite side, I would imagine.
And even more scary for people who are in the Canary Islands, actually, or much closer, as in the south coast of the UK and Europe. But these things are possible. We saw recently in that Tonga eruption, that colossal explosion which sent tsunamis right across the Pacific. Not huge, but sufficient to take 2 lives in Peru, I think. So these are real things that happen. Although some people think, we're never going to face these colossal catastrophes, but they will happen at some point.
Indeed. So talking about real things that happen, you've obviously written loads of scientific papers, but you're also an author of the growing genre of clifi. First of all, I know what that means. Can you explain what is clifi and tell us a bit about your latest book?
Yes, clifi is just a shortened version of climate fiction. It tends to include any literature that relates to the climate emergency and what the consequences of that might be. And there's a growing number of clifi books around. I mean, I think I wrote a piece in New Scientist about the whole genre recently, and shelves now are beginning to sort of bend under the weight of these books in the bookshops. But it's playing a critical role. It's a call to arms, really, telling people that this is what the world might be like if we don't do anything. My particular book, my novel Sky Seed, was all about a clandestine attempt by the UK and US governments to engineer our way out of the climate emergency using tiny little robots, nanobots that crunch up carbon in the atmosphere. I don't want to give too much away, but things don't go too well. Let's put it that way.
Indeed, they don't. If listeners want to see my review of that, then go to wordforest.org and search for Sky Seed, and you will find a review of that book. Your most recent, I believe, is Hothouse Earth. Is that correct?
Yeah, the one I've just finished is called Hothouse Earth and the Inhabitant's Guide. As you can guess, it's not going to be an optimistic read, but I hope it will be a realistic read. This is non-fiction this time, rather than fiction, but it's really looking at, well, its starting point is the fact that we are not now going to be able to avoid dangerous climate change. To have any chance of that, we need emissions to fall 45% in 8 years' time, and they're on track to go up 14% or so. So it's not going to happen. Practically, it isn't going to happen. But that doesn't mean we can't do anything. It just means we have to act even more urgently to stop a bleak situation becoming cataclysmic. And so that's what the book's about, is saying this is the sort of world we and our children and our grandchildren are going to be living in. If we don't do something, it's going to be a hell of a lot worse.
Indeed, indeed. It's a very sobering topic. And for the listeners, Bill was with us up at COP26 and sharing your views on things with a lot of people. What was your major takeaway from COP26? Did it go as you thought it would? Did it deliver anything that you were surprised that was better than you thought it would?
No, it didn't deliver anything better than I expected. It was incredibly disappointing, which matched my expectation, really. I mean, there were promises, there were pledges on deforestation, there were pledges on methane, cutting methane emissions, and various other things, but there are no mechanisms in place to ensure that these happen. There's no legal framework. They're just words at the moment. We're way past the time when words are sufficient. So it was massively disappointing, but I expected that.
So do you think that a COP is ever going to deliver what we need? I mean, obviously it's not going to solve the climate crisis, is not going to reduce it to zero, but is it going to ever deliver the legal framework, deliver the proper promises with measurement that we hope for?
Well, I suppose COP15 in Paris went some way towards that. Not far enough, obviously, and many countries haven't stuck to their pledges for that. But since then, we haven't really made a great deal of progress. And I can't see, I mean, to be honest, I can't see a COP conference where all of a sudden everybody realizes how bad the situation is and signs up to cut emissions as the science demands. I cannot see that happening. I think the only thing that's going to drive real change is the ramping up of extreme weather and the continual hammering of populations and communities by climate breakdown. We can see it happening now. Last year, more than ever, with the heat waves and floods and everything else. I think people are going to be not going to change until they're forced to change, which is, that's the human condition, to be honest.
Indeed, although one of the big pressures for people to change is, of course, technology, the move away from fossil fuel powered vehicles to electric vehicles, the potential of having sustainable flight in the future. Obviously, flight is one of the big things, and also human changes in diet, which I know a lot of people, including myself, believe that diet is a massive factor in climate change. And if we were to just have meatless Mondays or vegetarian diet or a completely plant-based diet, it would make a big difference to the world. Do you think we have the opportunity, the possibility that we ordinary people can make enough changes to make a big difference?
I think it's a combination, really, of governments and corporations on the one hand and individual actions on the other. I mean, massively cutting down on meat consumption obviously is critical from the point of view of individuals. Taken together, it can make a massive difference. I mean, the ideal situation is to pull back massively from meat and dairy production and use that land to plant trees on, which is a sort of win-win situation. Then you've got your trees sucking up the carbon, and you're not using massively intensive farming methods. But at the same time, it's got to be corporations and governments really take charge. I mean, to stop emissions, you have to do something at the wellhead and at the mine entrance. You have to stop the oil and gas and coal getting out of the ground. There are lots of ways of doing that. Insurers can refuse to insure installations, facilities. So if you can't insure your oil rig, you're not going to use it. We can stop rebates and subsidies on fossil fuel exploration and production, which are huge, trillions of dollars every year to allow people to produce these things at a massive profit. These are critical areas. If you keep this stuff in the ground, then at the stroke, you're halfway there at least. And one thing about the current situation in Ukraine is that it provides an opportunity to massively increase investment in renewables and to cut way back on fossil fuel production in the Western countries. I don't know if they're going to take that opportunity or go the other way and try and produce their own coal and gas, which makes it even oil and gas, which makes it even worse. But we'll just have to see. The opportunity is there.
Well, let's hope they take it. As we record this, there isn't anything concrete that we can point to out in the press, although there are rumours from our own government that they may be increasing the amount of gas production in the North Sea, which is evidently not a good thing from an environmentalist's point of view.
Utterly ridiculous.
You did sorry.
Well, I mean, Britain is hardly reliant on the USSR, on Russia rather, for oil and gas. We only get a tiny amount, so we don't need to do that. We need to, we can make up that little amount by, for example, the 7 barrages, which has now been resurrected. It could have been up and running years ago. The Swansea Bay project for producing tidal energy, which was the government refused to fund. All these sorts of things would solve that problem pretty much at a stroke.
Yes, indeed. I was very, very saddened that the Navitas Bay wind farm never actually happened just off the coast of Poole, and maybe that will be revived again. So in the past, you've worked on projects with our CEO Tracy, like the Wipe Out Wastes Award. That's a difficult one to get your tongue around, which encourage young people to be better environmentalists. Presumably that you did that because it really matters to you.
Oh, it matters hugely. I mean, for a start, young people are going to be most affected by what's happening in the climate and ecological emergency, and secondly, they're leading the way. I mean, not just Greta, but young people everywhere. I mean, I have an 18-year-old son who's massively politically aware and active. But he's just got he's had an article out today in Labour Outlook talking about young people and how they are, their outlook on life is very, very different from their parents, and it has to be with the climate emergency starting to hit hard. They will reap the whirlwind of that. So yes, anything that supports young people and tries to help them along in their fight to get people to recognise what the problems of the climate emergency is fantastic, and I'm all for it, and I was happy to get involved with that.
Excellent. So this interview is going out for Trees of the Key Awareness Week, and we think trees planting is a really, really good thing. You've already mentioned it. What's your favourite aspect of trees? What do they do for you when you're in amongst the trees?
Oh, well, I'm lucky enough to live up in the Peak District here, at about 1,000 feet up in the village. We've got an acre of land with a small wood in it and some gigantic beech trees, copper beeches. So they're always there. You see them in different lights at different times of the year. It's nearly always windy up here, so they're rustling away. And it's a background to my life, really. Trees. They're relaxing to look at, and they're relaxing to listen to. And I can't imagine not having them around. And one of the big problems we have up here in the Peak is ash trees, because most of the trees up here are ash, and they are ultimately all going to go, which is going to transform the landscape for the worse.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of planting up in your region, though. Do you think that's happening, that there is enough planting going on in the Peak District?
The moors still look like moors to me when they should be covered in trees. I mean, we have a real problem with flooding here on the River Derwent. We're nowhere near the river, fortunately. We're 1,000 feet higher. But every year now there's flooding in places like Matlock Bath, these sorts of towns. And the water's draining off the moors and draining off urbanized areas. And it's going to be happening every year. So these people are flooding out, the shops are flooding out every year. And tree planting is something that would help to alleviate that situation to some extent, and it's still not happening. It's still sheep and very short grass and not a lot else.
So I'm going to ask a leading question that I think I know what your answer will be. If you could do one thing to increase the number of trees in your particular area, what would it be? What would you make illegal or mandate to make tree planting more attractive and happen more in your area?
Well, I'm not sure what you're getting at, but it might well be the fact that we've got lots of grouse moors, particularly in the northern part of the Peak District, where large areas of land are owned by few people and they're kept for blasting innocent birds out of the sky by rich people. They're unnatural landscapes. They need to be planted with trees. They need to be transformed. They need to do the jobs that they used to do in terms of soaking up water. Not just trees either, but a renovation of the bog land there as well, which is deteriorated. So that's the key, certainly in the northern part of the Peak District. Get rid of the grouse, get rid of the people that shoot the grouse, and plant a lot of trees.
Okay, I did think you were going to give the answer about sheep, actually, because you did.
Oh, right.
Sheep
well,
farming,
yeah, I'm in the southern
part. Damaging, isn't it?
I'm in the southern part of the Peak where it is sheep that's probably the big problem. But you can probably have some sheep and a lot of trees as well as rather than a lot of sheep and no trees at all.
Yeah, I think you just have to protect the little trees from the sheep while they grow big enough that the sheep can't eat them anymore.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So my final question is a really silly one. What's your favourite species of tree? And what?
I mentioned it earlier, really, the beech. I love the beech. We've got, as I said, there are lots of ash trees in the Peak District, which are suffering now, but there are also some majestic beech woods that some of the Dales roads actually go through, and they are absolutely tremendous. I mean, they're a little bit, you imagine you're in some sort of Tolkien-esque landscape. They're so huge, and our own beech trees in the garden as well, the copper beeches and whatever, are tremendous things. Occasionally large bits fall off onto neighbours' fences, but apart from that, they're fantastic to have there.
Excellent. Bill, thank you very much for coming in and talking to me today. Thank you for the work that you do to help the Word Forest Organisation on its mission to get loads and loads of trees planted, mostly in Kenya, although some in the UK. And we look forward to having another interview with you maybe next year.
Indeed, yes, if not earlier.
If not earlier. Thank you very much, Bill McGuire.
You're very welcome. Thanks.